Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Welcome to Target Prelims 2021. Today, we are going to have the third lecture for Environment and Ecology. Now, if you have been liking our videos, liking the content of it, please ensure that you like the video, you share the video with your fellow aspirants, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Now, that being said, in the previous two lectures, we have covered important areas regarding environment, ecology, the biodiversity, the species, and also the protected areas. In this lecture today, we shall be talking about various important conventions and various important laws which have remained in prominence throughout the previous year. And we shall be trying to gain an access to various different conceptual ideas from the questions itself. In total, if you count the previous two classes, we have already covered close to around 65 to 70 different concepts. So after this class, you shall be well equipped to handle any kind of question from environment with a certain degree of confidence. Now, without further ado, let us quickly move on to the different questions. Now, starting with the first question, this is one of the questions that we had discussed yesterday. And there seemed to be slight confusion regarding that. So today, we are going to discuss this question again, and we shall try to understand what this question is about and what is its correct solution. So this question is about snow leopard. So, in the context of India's first snow leopard conservation center, consider the following statements. The first statement being, it is being established in Uttarakhand under the Secure Himalaya project. Now this is correct. So, it is being established in the region around Uttarakhand. The second statement is, it is built in partnership with United Nations Environment Program. Now this is incorrect, because rather than the United Nations Environment Program, it is actually UNDP or United Nations Development Program, which is associated with the development of this particular conservation center. Hence, it will be incorrect. The third is, the snow leopard is listed as endangered by IUCN Red List. Now, IUCN had for a very long time kept snow leopard under the endangered list. It was only after its true range and its true aerial coverage was discovered, and it was found out that snow leopard exists not only across the length and the breadth of the Himalayas, but also in the mountain ranges and the mountains of Central Asia, that IUCN came upon the conclusion that we cannot keep it under endangered anymore. Because in such a larger area, it was actually calculated that the population of snow leopard is significantly larger than what was estimated earlier. And it was only because of the rare sighting of snow leopard that their actual number could not be reached at earlier. So thereby, the IUCN relegated the level or the category of snow leopard from endangered to that of a vulnerable category. So snow leopard is actually vulnerable. Okay? So that is why the third statement will also be incorrect. Now please don't confuse this with the species recovery program. Even though snow leopard is listed under vulnerable category, but still it is one of those species which is targeted under the species recovery program, okay, which we had discussed yesterday. So in this question, the correct answer shall be B, that is 1 only. For snow leopard, always remember that it is vulnerable, it is no longer endangered. Now, having said that, moving on to the questions. Which of the following statements regarding the FAME 2, that is faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicle scheme, is or are correct? Now, what is this FAME and FAME 2 schemes? So these are basically, and these have been launched by the government to bring about a kind of a revolution in the electric mobility sector in our country. Hereby, incentives are provided to the various manufacturers as well, depending upon the capacity of the batteries and depending upon the usage, so that the final price of the products of the electric vehicles are considerably cheaper. We shall be looking upon this again, but let us take a look at the statements. So it was launched to achieve the goals of National Electric Mobility Mission Plan. This is correct. Second, it will incentivize the vehicles that are fitted with advanced batteries. That is again correct. The third statement, it will cover only public transport electric vehicles. Now, while this is incorrect, but here again the word only gives you a kind of a clue, a kind of a hint. Wherever absolutism is used, most of the times there is an exception which lies thereby. Now, when it comes to the FAME program, it is true that public sector and basically public transport electric vehicles are targeted, and the main idea is that if you involve electric vehicles in almost all the public transport vehicles, your overall emission will come down drastically. But having said that, there is still a significant amount of impetus and a kind of an incentive provided to the manufacturers to provide electric vehicles even for private purposes. So thereby, this statement shall be incorrect. So here you get the answer 1 and 2. And you can see by elimination method as well, you could have reached the answer by eliminating all the options if you know that 3 is incorrect. Okay? Now, looking into this particular program. So it was launched, as we have already reiterated, to achieve the National Electric Mobility Program. Now, when you talk about the vehicles plying on the road, oftentimes we don't think of them to be that big emitters. But if you consider any metropolitan area, particularly in our country itself, take the case of Delhi NCR or the National Capital Region, you will find that more than 25% of the pollution caused in Delhi is because of vehicular emissions. Now, because the vehicles, they end up burning the fossil fuels, they end up emitting huge plethora of different greenhouse gases, from nitrogen dioxides rather, nitrous oxides, carbon monoxides, black carbon, sulfur dioxide, etc. All these different emissions, they combine together and they can sometimes form even more disastrous pollutants such as tropospheric or ground level ozone. They can form photochemical smog. And when that is formed, then it immediately becomes disastrous for the human population, and particularly so the younger ones and the old-aged people. So that is why electric mobility is going to be the next stage of reducing our overall emissions. And FAME scheme is a landmark scheme when it comes to that particular problem. Now, initially, it was to be implemented, that is FAME 2 was supposed to be implemented for 3 years, from 2019 up till 2022. But recently, the ministry has announced fresh incentives and has announced its intention to carry out this program and this support scheme for up to around 2024. Now, why is it that the ministry is announcing a kind of a support in this sector? If you understand the basic problem that we are facing, or rather the whole world is facing when it comes to electric vehicles, the problem is regarding the lack of adequate technology in order to develop batteries. It is true that there are certain batteries which are available and there are researches and developments which have been going on, but still there is a long way to go, because these batteries have a limited shelf life as well. And to add on to that, there needs to be a proper and adequate charging infrastructure for these vehicles. Now, all this is very capital intensive. You need to invest quite significant amount of money to build all this series of infrastructure projects. And that is why there needs to be an incentive from the government. Other than that, battery technology and also acquisition of certain important minerals which can help develop the battery technology also requires a kind of a hand-holding. Because the industry right now is not capable enough to do this on its own and still have the price of the vehicles to be attractive enough for the passengers and for the buyers. Because if electric vehicles are priced at 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs, 50 lakhs in our country, obviously the usage is not going to be humongous. So that is why the government is hand-holding the industry by the help of this particular scheme. Okay? Now, moving on to the next question. The next question is regarding fly ash. So, which of the following statements is or are correct about fly ash which is frequently seen in the news? Now, what is this fly ash? So, whenever in a thermal power plant, and you would have seen thermal power plant at some stage of your life or the other, whenever there is an emission and coal is burned, then in that very tiny amount of ash and very tiny particles of ash, they start depositing themselves in the area around itself and the area around the power plant. And it is one of the major pollutants. The whole world has been grappling with the issue of fly ash for some decades now. After all, the thermal power generation has been prevalent for quite some time. So, there have been different policies which have been brought in by the government to take care of this fly ash which is generated as a result of burning of coal. Now, let us take a look at the statements and then we'll try to get to know slightly more about fly ash as well. So, it is a raw material used for burning coal in the thermal power plants. This is absolutely incorrect, because it is not a raw material but rather an effluent or an output or a byproduct after burning or after undertaking combustion of coal. Second, the bricks made out of fly ash are radioactive. Now, this is true. And why this is true is because fly ash, it is oftentimes compressed and condensed to make a brick. But then fly ash also has slight amount of gypsum in it. And gypsum is one of those minerals which emanates radioactivity. In fact, yesterday we would have seen and you would have observed the question regarding underground radiation as well, underground radiation pollution. There also the groundwater, which oftentimes we say that it is contaminated with radioactive elements, it is the groundwater being contaminated with parts of gypsum, and that is why it emanates radioactivity. Fly ash also sometimes is found to emit certain radioactive waves. So, this is correct. Third, no Indian state has a specific policy for its sustainable utilization. Now, this particular statement is wrong. Why? Because states such as Maharashtra, who have a lot of thermal power plants within their state territory, they have been particularly active to make laws regarding the utilization of fly ash. The state government has made it mandatory on the thermal power plants to come upon with a usage plan for fly ash. So, various different states are also exploring a similar kind of law. So, in this question, you have B, that is 2 only, which is correct. Now, when we talk about fly ash, one of the most common usages of fly ash has been to make bricks out of it. And these bricks, as you can observe, they are basically made or are generated when you compact or when you press the fly ash into a cuboidal shape. Now, recently, the center has made it mandatory for all the thermal power plants and all the power generators to come up with a plan for usage of the fly ash within 3 to 5 years of the emission. If that is not adhered to, then basically the non-compliant plant shall be fined to the tune of rupees 1,000 per ton of fly ash which is thrown out into the atmosphere or into the surrounding region. Now, one thing about fly ash is that it is very light. So, oftentimes it can also be carried out with the winds, and it can reach to urban populace and it can be inhaled, thereby leading to breathing problems, bronchitis, etc. But other than that, many of the times this fly ash deposit, as you can observe, it is to be found in the near vicinity of the power plant, and thereby it leads and it makes the land unusable. It renders the land infertile. If very slight amount of fly ash is added, a minimal amount, then still the land gains a slight amount of fertility. But when fly ash is emitted continuously day in and day out, there is a huge thick deposit on the ground which makes the soil muddy, murky, as well as it leads to land pollution and wastage of land as well. Okay? That is why such stringent laws are being brought into, and that is why fly ash is very relevant for the examination as well. Now, moving on to the next question. Now, before looking at the question regarding the topic of conservation of migratory species, let us come to know slightly about this particular concept. What is this CMS, or conservation of migratory species? So, as the name suggests, there are certain species across the globe who are not limited to a certain area in itself. They continue to move around, and for them the territorial jurisdiction doesn't matter. For them it is the ecosystem which actually continues into different areas, which leads them to move from one territory to the other. Now, how this convention came into existence was that people realized that while in certain countries there might be very stringent laws regarding conservation of species, but what if that particular animal has crossed the boundary and reached a different country where poaching and hunting are a norm? Then all the efforts of conservation shall go to the waste. So that is why, in order to curb such issues of transboundary movement, that is where this CMS came into existence. It is also what is referred to as the Bonn Convention. Now, it is an environmental treaty which has been conducted under the aegis of UNEP, or United Nations Environment Program, and it came into force way back in 1st November 1983. Now, for these conventions, it is always advisable to get some clue regarding when it was brought into effect. Because UPSC can always ask you a question, and UPSC will confuse you regarding the 1992 Rio Summit. Because the 1992 Rio Summit regarding UNFCCC was so landmark and was so instrumental that oftentimes we confuse ourselves and we think that, okay, this convention might have been concluded in 1992. So that is where you have to be aware if it was done prior to that or later than that. Okay? Now, India had hosted the 13th Conference of Parties, or COP, of CMS in 2020. And basically, India has been an important member. Because if you take a look at it, then before the convention, India had around 451 species which either come to the country or which live in the country itself, which needs a kind of a conservation. So, After the convention or the COP, 6 more species were added. And now India hosts around 457 species which have been provided protection under CMS. Now out of these, the latest additions have been the Asian elephant, the Great Indian bustard, Bengal florican, oceanic white-tipped shark, urial, and smooth hammerhead shark. So because these have been the latest additions, out of these, the top 3, that is the Asian elephant, the Great Indian bustard, and Bengal florican, are important because they are critically threatened, right? So all of these, they need protection. How? Because when you talk about Asian elephant, particularly in the region around northeastern part of the country, oftentimes these elephants, they can migrate into the region around Myanmar or sometimes even Bangladesh. Even though very rarely they venture into Bangladesh, but they often can. Similarly, from the region of Assam, oftentimes the elephants enter into Bhutan. So there's a transboundary migration, and that is why conservation is required. When you talk about Great Indian bustard and Bengal florican, so here the movement happens between India and Pakistan and India and Nepal respectively. The Bengal florican oftentimes reaches Nepal, whereas the Great Indian bustard oftentimes crosses Rajasthan and enters into Pakistan. There they get struck with the power lines, and that leads to their untimely death as well. So that is why conservation practices which are followed in our country for these particular animals and these species need to be followed in the neighboring region as well. Okay? Now, why India is an important member of CMS is because India lies in the zone of 3 different flyways. What are flyways? So flyways are those areas or those geographical reaches where many of the birds, many of the migratory birds rather, they move about in order to carry out their reproductive cycle, in order to lead their lives in the later stage as well. So oftentimes they migrate during the harsh conditions in their own habitat, and once the harsh conditions they pass away, then these birds return to their own territory. So India has 3 different flyways or flight paths used by the birds, and they are the Central Asian Flyway, East Asian Flyway, and East Asian Australasian Flyway. So as you can see that you have here, these are the important flyways that India lies in the region of, and that is where it is very important to conserve these species when they come to India. And yesterday we had connected it with the aspect of wetland conservation, that why it is very important to conserve the wetland, not only for the domestic species, but also the migratory species. So from an examination perspective, you need to understand the 3 flyways through which or which pass through the territory of the country. Now, having said that, taking a look at the question. So with reference to the Convention of Migratory Species, which of the following statements is or are correct? First, it is an environmental treaty under the aegis of IUCN. But we have seen that it is actually a treaty under the aegis of United Nations Environment Programme. So the first statement shall be incorrect. Eliminate the first statement wherever it is possible. Now, even though we have reached the answer already, but let us go through it. It is the only convention that deals with taking or harvesting of species from the wild. Now, while this statement might seem a bit vague, what this statement refers to is a kind of a utilization of various different products. So many of these species, So when you think about migratory species, don't think only about birds. You have fishes, you have mammals, you have different types of reptiles, all of them are included under migratory species. So utilization of their products, utilization of the byproducts, etc., that has also been dealt with under this particular convention, so that unwanted exploitation is not carried out just under the pretext that the convention has been vague about it. That is why the convention is very clear in this. So here the second statement will be correct. The third statement is, the 13th meeting of the COP of this convention was held in India. This is correct. It was held in 2020. So the correct answer in this case will be B, 2 and 3 only. Now for all the conventions, all the different types of conventions that we shall be looking upon, understand the structure of them. So you will have a secretariat, which will be like a working committee, and then you will have a conference of parties. The conference of parties is basically when delegates and delegations from all the member countries, they participate together, and there is an annual or a biannual summit or a meeting, and decisions are taken there. Previous decisions are tracked regarding their implementation and up till what stage these programs have been implemented, and future strategy is also decided in the conference of parties. So conference of parties for all the different conventions will always be the highest decision making body, and that is why conference of parties, where it is held, always is important. Now here we have seen that B, 2 and 3 only is the correct answer. Moving on to the National Action Plan on Climate Change. Now, National Action Plan on Climate Change is basically an overarching plan which has been launched by our country, and this has been in works for some time now, for almost a decade now. But why it is relevant for the examination? That is because this National Action Plan has got various sub-plans as well, as you can see. Now, work on each of these plans has to go on simultaneously. And the basic purpose is the same: to mitigate the effects and impacts of climate change and to place India in a suitable position so that the climate change doesn't impact us so harshly, and also to make India one of the more responsible members of the global community. So under this, you will find that there are various different sub-schemes as well. One of them is the National Solar Mission. Now this National Solar Mission talks about improvising, or rather promoting, the usage of solar power in the country, so that there is a kind of a reduced dependence on fossil fuels. Most of the power which is generated in our country is basically through thermal power plants. So that is why there is an increased effort to improve the solar power generation, so that the dependency on those thermal power plants is reduced. This particular mission is undertaken and is actually implemented by Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Okay. Now, the next is National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency. Now, this is also a part of National Action Plan for Climate Change. Now, what is this particular sub-scheme or sub-program? So, when we utilize electricity, when we utilize energy, oftentimes we don't do it efficiently. How so? So, suppose you are living in a house, and during summer season there is an extraordinary amount of warming in your particular room, due to which you always have to keep the AC switched on. Now, these air conditioners are also responsible for emissions. Had the house and had the building been built in a sustainable manner, and had the energy utilization been sustainable and efficient, thereby you would have a lesser consumption of energy. Similarly, in many of the office buildings, you will come across the fact that there are very old equipment still being used. Now, one thing regarding old equipment is that they consume larger amount of power. The more power you generate, more coal you are consuming, and more emissions are actually being given out into the atmosphere. So that is why you need more efficient devices, and that is where the whole idea of 3-star rating, 4-star rating, 5-star rating of the devices comes into the picture. All of that is being carried out under the National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency. The nodal ministry for this is basically Ministry of Power. Okay? Then, National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. So, the region or the area that we live in, how do we treat that area? How responsible are we in disposing the solid wastes? And how clean that region is. Oftentimes, you will come across many large habitations, and particularly so in all the developing countries, and more so in India, where the rate of urbanization is quite huge, that you will find that many of the times the houses are built in such close quarters and in such clustered format that there is an increased heat absorption. And when the urban areas, they start absorbing more amount of heat, it tends to create a kind of an urban heat island, where the temperature of the urban areas is slightly greater and larger than the surrounding and the neighboring suburbs, and also the nearby rural areas. So in order to prevent such urban heat island formations, you need to have proper scientific building construction. You need to have a kind of a building code. Other than that, there is another issue, and the issue is that now that you have so many office spaces sprawling up across the urban landscape, many of these urban offices, they have very poor natural lighting, due to which always multiple lights need to be switched on. Always, perpetually, air conditioners need to be switched on because there is very poor aeration standard. And that consumes a lot of energy, emitting huge amount of greenhouse gases. That is why you need a proper sustainable habitat. A habitat which is not only enough to accommodate the growing demands of the urban population, but is scientific enough at the same time to cater to the requirements of the changing climate. And this is actually taken care of by Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Now, why I am mentioning ministry in few of these is because questions can be framed from this as well. So, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. You will find a question that, okay, this is a sub-scheme regarding National Action Plan for Climate Change. So, which is the nodal ministry which is operating that? So, that is why you need to know few of the important ones. Then, next is the National Water Mission for better quality of water that is available, and also a more responsible usage. Because as climate change is upon us, and as the global warming is happening at an incremental rate, India as a country has been suffering from water stress. There is an overall lack of adequate drinking water facility in many parts of the country. And the rainfall patterns are also changing. So you will have certain months of increased rainfall and then subsequent months of absolutely dry conditions. Take the case of this particular year. During the month of August, overall we had a scarcity in the amount of rainfall. Otherwise, generally August is supposed to be water sufficient month. September is supposed to be slightly drier, but what happened in September? Everywhere, be it in Maharashtra, Delhi, anywhere that you see, you will find that there is surplus amount of water because of sudden rainfall. So as the rainfall pattern is changing, the threat of water stress on our country is increasing. And that is why you do need a sustainable water management as well, and hence the National Water Mission. It is actually carried out by the Ministry of Water and also Ganga Rejuvenation. Then National Mission for Sustaining the Himalayan Ecosystem. The Himalayan ecosystem, very prone to landslides, very prone to cloudbursts, and very prone to glacial melting. The ecosystem has been vanishing right in front of our eyes. So why do we need to care about such an ecosystem where anyways the population is not huge? That is because Himalayas as an ecosystem, they tend to influence the climatic conditions across the rest of the country. And if you are unable to conserve or save the Himalayas, then many hundreds of species which live there, especially in the mountainous states, all of them can quickly go extinct. Because those mountainous species, they don't have large area to migrate as well. So that is why Himalayan ecosystem needs to be preserved. It needs to be taken care of. It needs to be taken care of from what? From rampant, unsustainable constructions. So oftentimes you will see if the Himalayan slope is somewhat like that, very quickly it is blasted through and a road is constructed. And proper scientific research is not done. But when you do that, you tend to make the rock structures a bit weaker and the topsoil becomes loose. So due to that, there are frequent landslides, and the southern slope of Himalayas in particular, which are slightly steeper than the northern slopes, they are suffering the worst of this human interference. Many of the times, the local varieties of plants which grow in the Himalayan slopes, they are uprooted, and when many of the builders, they construct, let's say, resorts, etc., they plant artificial or invasive species. One of such invasive species has been eucalyptus. And these invasive species very quickly start propagating, and their population starts increasing drastically. And due to that, incidents such as forest fires, they are always on the up. So that is why you need to conserve this. Now, which is the ministry or the department which takes care of it? It is the Department of Science and Tech which takes care of this particular mission. Then other than that, you have the National Mission for a Green India. This deals with increasing the forest cover of the country by around 5 million hectares to reach that magical figure of having 33% of the area under forest cover. That has been a target which has been set by the National Forest Policy 1988. This is again important. So, National Mission for a Green India is regarding increase of the green cover. Because if you are able to increase the green cover, only then will there be a carbon sequestration which will happen as well. Recent surveys have shown that during the winter months, 14 out of the 15 most polluted cities across the world, they lie across the northern Gangetic plains. And that has been because of the slowly diminishing green cover in these areas. This brings about a climatic interference as well and changes the rainfall pattern, bringing about water stress, bringing about a kind of a reduced agricultural growth. So all of them are linked together. So National Mission for Green India is another one of those which is being looked into by Ministry of Forest, Environment, and Climate Change. Then comes National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture. So in the first lecture, we had dealt with the issue regarding sustainable agriculture, what sustainable agriculture actually is and why do we require that. So this is a mission which takes care of that, okay, so that unscientific or unsustainable practices which lead to more emission of carbon dioxide and methane, particularly so from the fields, that doesn't happen. And agriculture, which is a mainstay of our economy and our employment provider, that doesn't turn out to be one of the largest issues that India has. So these are the sub-schemes which are provided under the National Action Plan for Climate Change. Here, you have to understand each of these sub-schemes are vitally important. And our country is in various stages of their implementation, but the only problem that we are facing right now is there is increased stress only on one of these submissions, that is National Solar Mission, while the other important sub-programs are on the verge of being ignored. Okay? Now, the question, with reference to Green India Mission, which of the following statements are correct? First, it is one of the missions which comes under the umbrella of the National Action Plan on Climate Change. This is correct, obviously. It aims to increase the growth in forest or tree cover to 500 million hectares in India. Now here, it is very easy to assume that, okay, are we supposed to remember the area as well? You are not supposed to remember the area, but you are supposed or you are expected to apply logic. The whole area of the country is somewhere around 328 to 330 million hectares. So if the area of the whole country is less than 500 million hectares, how can a mission aim to achieve more forestation or more forest cover than that? So this becomes absolutely incorrect. Such statements are oftentimes to be found in the prelims exam as well, where we get afraid by looking at the data pointer and we think, okay, we have not learned that, but if you apply logic, it will be very vague and it will immediately make sense. So what is the target? The target is 5 million hectares. Okay? Then, the Gram Sabha is the key institution for planning and implementation of the program at the village level. That is true and correct, because after all, it is the Gram Sabha which identifies those areas which can be taken for the program of afforestation or reforestation. So here you have C, that is 1 and 3, which are correct. Now in this question again you get an ideal example of elimination, because if you will observe the incorrect statement, that is 2, which is so incorrect if you apply logic, you can easily eliminate that and you will be able to reach the correct answer. Now moving on. With reference to the National Mission for Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystem, which of the following statements is or are incorrect? So here, which of them are incorrect? So there is the Department of Science and Tech, which is the implementing agency. This is correct. Second is, it covers all the states of Northeast India. This is again correct, because the Himalayan ecosystem is prevalent in all the states of Northeast India. Other than that, it is also to be found in Sikkim, West Bengal, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, as well as the Union Territories of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh. So here both the statements are correct and we have to find out which is incorrect. So the answer will be D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Now when we are talking about National Action Plan, there is another sub-program or another sub-plan which is not that particularly important, but still if it is asked, you will have to tell about that as well, and that is about National Mission for Knowledge and sharing of best practices regarding climate change and its mitigation efforts. So that is also a subplan, in total making it 8. So basically that is again handled by Department of Science and Tech. Okay? Now, moving on to the next question. With reference to the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, consider the following statements. The first statement is, it is a statutory body established under the Electricity Act 2003. This is incorrect. Now, Bureau of Energy Efficiency is a statutory body. That is, it has been established as per a law which has been passed. But then the law, rather than Electricity Act, has been Energy Conservation Act. Energy Conservation Act 2001. Okay? So that is the important catch point here. This again is under the National Action Plan for Climate Change. Okay? So the first statement in itself is incorrect. Now, it works under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. This is again incorrect. Why? Because it works under the Ministry of Power. These are the areas where you can easily get confused. So the second statement will also be incorrect. The third statement is, its primary objective is reducing the energy intensity of the Indian economy. Energy intensity here refers to the rate at which the economic activities and the rate at which the economy is basically consuming energy. So if you reduce that, emissions will automatically reduce in the long run as well. So the third statement is correct and first two are incorrect. So the correct answer in this case will be A, that is 3 only. Okay? Now, then we come to the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. Now, Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD, it is basically a legally binding treaty to conserve biodiversity and has been enforced since 1993, and it operates under the United Nations Environment Program again. So this is important, that it works under what? Okay? Now, it has 3 main objectives. The first objective is the conservation of biological diversity. Second is the sustainable use of components of biological diversity. And the third is the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. So when you have any genetic resources, how do you utilize that? And whether you can utilize it efficiently or not. That is under CBD. Okay? So CBD takes care of the biodiversity and the richness of the biodiversity. And that is why CBD has been so important. So it is a legally binding treaty, even though it does not interfere with the domestic laws, but still it is legally binding. Okay? Now, if you look at it, then the 3 objectives of it are clear enough. That is, you have to conserve them, you have to utilize them in a sustainable way so that the biodiversity is not threatened enough, and also all the benefits that are accruing from the biological diversity, you have to use them as well. Now, this CBD, over a period of time since its inception, has been further strengthened by many different additional protocols. It is these protocols from which questions are oftentimes framed. So the prime need or the prime objective that you should have is that you should have some clue regarding what these protocols, or if anybody talks about Aichi targets or Nagoya protocol or Cartagena protocol, they are related to which of them. So that preliminary amount of idea you should have. Even if you are unable to remember these protocols in detail, you should have some clue regarding what they deal with. So the first protocol which was adopted way back in 2000 was the Cartagena Protocol. Now the Cartagena Protocol, it seeks to protect biological diversity from the genetic modifications. So many of the times you have certain plant species which have been genetically tinkered with. And thereby, if suppose, let us assume that you have tinkered with a regular plant, let's say like mango, and the seeds of the tinkered genetically evolved plant has been propagated in various different countries, then the indigenous varieties will always be threatened. So that is why Cartagena Protocol deals with the potential risks posed by living modified organisms, which are also referred to as LMOs. And that results from the modern biotech. So oftentimes, not only in animals but also in plants, we see these kinds of modifications which can threaten the already existent species. Then there was additional protocol, that was the Nagoya Protocol. Nagoya Protocol was the one which dealt with sharing of benefits and also having a kind of an incentive or reward for the traditional knowledge. So in many of the areas where biodiversity is present in huge numbers, you will find that many people and many tribes have been living there for centuries. They have had a traditional knowledge regarding the utilization of certain plants and regarding the utilization or rather extraction of certain plants and make certain medicines, natural products, etc. So just so as to ensure that this convention doesn't become a binding impediment on them, that is why it covers traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources and all the genetic resources which are covered under CBD and the benefits which arise out of the convention. Because otherwise, certain tribes, certain poor population can very easily be targeted that why are you exploiting the product of this plant is under CBD and it has to be protected. But those tribes have been doing that for centuries and they know how to do it in an efficient and sustainable manner. They have a kind of a traditional knowledge for it. So just in order to ensure that they should not be penalized. Now, when this Nagoya Protocol was being brought into effect, there were a set of 20 targets which were set. And these 20 targets, they were referred to as the Aichi targets. Now, what were these targets? First of all, these targets were supposed to be reached by the year 2020 itself. These targets dealt with raising awareness amongst the population regarding biodiversity, raising awareness amongst the policy makers that how to conserve biodiversity, what is the importance of biodiversity, and also ensuring that areas across the globe which are threatened should be brought under the protected areas. So there were a host of around 20 targets. Those targets, they were set at the same time and they were supposed to be achieved. Sadly, as of now, none of those 20 targets have been achieved completely, even though it is said and various reports have pointed out that out of those 20, 6 targets have been achieved partially so. Now, after 2020, there were another set of targets which were set for 2030 action targets. And these 2030 action targets, they have around 21 action-oriented targets over a decade which has to be achieved up till 2030. And amongst the major of those targets, if you will observe, to bring at least 30% of land and sea under protected areas where hunting activities cannot be carried out rampantly, where there is some amount of basic amount of protection provided to the species. And also a 50% greater reduction in the rate of introduction of invasive alien species. So, on the face of it, invasive alien species don't seem to be that much of a problem. But take the example of one of these species, such as Burmese python. Now, Burmese python is indigenous in the northeastern part of the country and also Myanmar, as the name suggests. Now, it is a reptile, right? Now, basically, Burmese python, they were introduced into United States around the region of Texas. And within a decade, there has been a population explosion, because there is no top predator which can actually restrict their population. And Burmese python, their rate has been increasing, their growth has been increasing, endangering the local population of smaller animals. That is where, if invasive alien species are not checked or they are not controlled, it can threaten the local biodiversity immensely. Then reducing nutrient loss to the environment by at least half, and pesticides by at least 2/3, and eliminating the discharge of plastic waste. Obviously, that remains a kind of a unicorn goal for all the environment conservation techniques and all the various different missions. Nature-based contribution to global climate change mitigation effort by at least around 10 gigaton of equivalent carbon. So, these are the various targets which have been set. You don't have to remember that, but you have to be aware that there have been fresh targets set after the HE targets. Okay? Now, the question which can appear from that. With reference to HE biodiversity target 2011 to 2020, consider the following statements. First, they are adopted under Kyoto Protocol. This is incorrect. They have not been adopted under Kyoto Protocol. Second, at the global level, none of the 20 targets have been fully achieved. This is true. None of them have been completely achieved. Now, which of the given statements above is or are incorrect? So, here, which is incorrect? Only one, that is A, is incorrect. So, all you have to be aware of is the basics. These can be particularly confusing. CBD is one of the more confusing conventions that you will come across in environment and ecology. So, that is why it will be absolutely impossible for you to remember all the targets, etc. Don't go for that. Just have a brief idea what they are. Okay? Now, after that, there is another important convention, and that is CITES, or Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species and Wild Fauna and Flora. This is also what is referred to as Washington Convention, because of the city where it was arrived at. Now, this was drafted way back in 1963 at a meeting of IUCN, and it entered into force in 1975. Presently, there are around 183 different parties, member nations, organizations, etc., which are a participant to this CITES. Okay? Now, here it is located in Geneva and it is administered by UNEP. Okay? So, this is something you have to understand, that it was adopted at a meeting of IUCN, members of IUCN, and right now it is administered by UNEP. Now, CITES has got various different animals located or listed under different appendices, Appendix 1, Appendix 2 and Appendix 3. Generally, this has to do with curbing upon the trade on these species which are threatened. Since the coronavirus pandemic has been raging, trade of these illegal species or endangered species has already been in significant discussion. After all, one of the theories has been that the pangolin was responsible for the initial emanation of COVID virus. So that is why sites becomes particularly important in this particular year. Now, if you will observe, as I said, there are various different appendices for the different species. So under Appendix 1, these are the species that are in danger of extinction, which are very threatened. So there, the commercial trade is absolutely prohibited. If you want to go for import or export, even for, let's say, reintroduction of the species in certain environment, etc., you have to take prior permissions. So Asiatic lions, tigers, sea turtles, gorillas, etc., and around 931 species are present in that particular list. Under Appendix 2, those species which aren't immediately under the threat of extinction, but conservation of them will be very beneficial. So there we need monitoring so that the trade doesn't become a threat. And here in total 34,000 species have been listed. For example, American alligators, which are used for handbags, their skin is used for handbags and other sneakers and leather jackets, etc. Then Appendix 3, here any species which is, let's say, protected in any of the country and not in all of the countries, they are covered under Appendix 3. Okay? So it might be possible that certain species is of least concern, let's say, in other areas, but is very critical and critically endangered in other areas. Those species are targeted or are classified under Appendix 3, and 147 species have been listed under these. Now let us take a look at the type of question. So, with reference to sites, consider the following statement. Now, in the case of sites, you also have to remember that this is the one which is referred to as a Washington Convention. Okay? Now, this convention was adopted in 1963 at a meeting of the UNEP. UNEP meeting was not where it was actually formalized or adopted. This is incorrect. Now, CITES Secretariat is the supreme decision-making body of the convention. Here, remember what we had talked about, that it is always going to be the conference of parties which is going to be the supreme decision-making body. Secretariat is the working committee. Okay? So this is again basically incorrect. The third, it is legally binding on the parties. So CITES is not per se legally binding on the parties, but it gives the or any party or any member which adheres to CITES, they give a kind and they have to provide a kind of a freedom for the inspecting agencies to come into the country and verify the biodiversity, etc. So this is again incorrect. So which of them are incorrect? So you have D, that is 1, 2 and 3, all of them are incorrect. Now, again another question. Suppose a species is placed in the Appendix 1 of CITES. Which of the following statements is correct in this regard? So here, the first statement, the species have become extinct. So apply logic here. This is a convention for illegal trade. So if a species has already been extinct, why will you put it under Appendix 1? So this is incorrect. Second, the species had witnessed a remarkable recovery in the recent past. Again incorrect. Third, the species is facing a very high risk of extinction in the wild in near future. This is the correct statement. Okay? Now, after that, coming to another important topic, that is Global Environment Facility. Now, this Global Environment Facility had been a byproduct of the 1992 Rio Summit of United Nations. Now, this 1992 UN Summit has been always important because of UNFCCC, that is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, it was here that this GEF was sought or was conceptualized. It was there that a decision to make a facility which would take care of the financial funding for the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries, so that they also have a kind of a technological wherewithal as well as a capacity to undertake the various programs of climate change. That is where GEF was actually conceptualized. And till now, GEF alone has been responsible for disbursing more than around 15 to 20 billion dollars of funds for climate conservation and also the conservation of the ecosystem across the globe, more particularly so in developing and less developed countries. So, the question, the GEF serves as the financial mechanism for which of the following conventions? CBD, yes. UNFCCC, yes. United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, absolutely yes. And Minamata Convention on Mercury, this is again true. Minamata Convention is in order to fight off the mercury poisoning, which is also referred to as Minamata disease. Other than that, GEF is also and has also been responsible for certain other programs such as Montreal Protocol. It provides funding to them as well. And when it comes to the Stockholm Convention, which deals with the persistent organic pollutants, there also some part of the funding is provided by GEF. So GEF is quite instrumental in providing the funding activities. So which is the correct answer? Here the answer will be D, that is 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay? Now, which of the following conventions does not have prior informed consent procedure included in it? Now, what is this prior informed consent? So, suppose let us say that India is trading with Indonesia, and Indonesia wants to export or rather wants to send over certain materials to India which can be hazardous. So, in that case, before sending the material, you need to get a consent or you need to inform the importing country beforehand so that they are aware of what are the materials which are coming into their country, so that they are not surprised by the sudden damage to the biodiversity and they can take an informed and responsible decision. Now, when you take a look at all these different conventions, out of these you will find that one of them, that is Vienna Convention. Vienna Convention deals with the ozone layer depletion. And it loosely talks about curbing the emissions which are responsible for depleting or making a ozone hole. So, in this case, obviously you don't require any kind of prior informed consent, and hence in this case Vienna Convention will be the correct answer. But what are the other conventions? So, the other conventions, for example, Stockholm Convention, it deals with the POPs, or rather persistent organic pollutants, those pollutants which don't dissipate easily, which don't decompose easily, but rather they are present in the nature and the ecosystem for a very long time, and they enter the food chain, the food web. So, how to dispose these chemicals, how to dispose these particles in a responsible way, that is Stockholm Convention. Then Basel Convention also deals with the trade of hazardous materials. Some of the hazardous materials include chemicals, etc. So, for example, oftentimes you will find that there are certain countries where the ship, when it gets old, they send to various different countries such as India and Bangladesh to carry out the breaking of the ship breaking yards that are present. In India, you have the Alang shipyard in Gujarat. Now, when you break a ship, there is asbestos which is released into the ground and into the atmosphere, and that is hazardous. So there you need to take a prior informed consent. Rotterdam Convention also deals with certain chemicals which are very hazardous when they are put out into the environment. So all these, they deal with the actual exchange of materials with different countries and with different parties together, but Vienna Convention does not deal with that. Okay? Now, the next question. With reference to the Animal Welfare Board, which of the following statements is or are correct? First statement, it has been set up under Wildlife Protection Act. This is incorrect, because this has been set up under Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960. Okay? So it has not been set up under Wildlife Protection Act. So first statement is incorrect. Second, Rukmani Devi Arundale pioneered the setting up of Animal Welfare Board. This is absolutely correct. By the way, Rukmani Devi Arundale is one such individual or personality that you would have come across even under art and culture. When it comes to rejuvenation of Bharatnatyam in our country, she has been one of the pioneers. So that is why this is an important personality. Then, it works under the administrative guidance of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. This is incorrect. It works under the Ministry of Animal Husbandry, Dairying and Fisheries. So this is again incorrect. So the correct answer in this case will be D, that is 2 only. Okay? Moving on to the next question. With reference to various waste management rules notified by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in India, which of the following rules contain provisions for EPR or Extended Producer Responsibility? Now, before moving into the statements, what is this concept of EPR? So suppose you have a product, let us say a kind of a cold drink or a soda bottle. Now, oftentimes you will find that soda bottles are present in plastic casings. Now, people consume that, they will throw the plastic away. So, who is responsible for that waste that is generated? There comes the concept of extended producer responsibility. That the producer who comes up with such kind of products, it is upon that producer to ensure that producers spend significant amount of money in recovery of that waste as well, or rather the producer is incentivized to switch over to more eco-friendly packaging, casings, etc. So recently the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has come up with a detailed amendments for plastic usage in our country, where the ministry has already talked about the plastic usage and extending EPR facilities and EPR conditions even on plastic manufacturers. So, which of these particular rules or which of these rules have to abide by EPR? First, hazardous and other wastes. Management and Transboundary Movement Rules 2016, no. Then E-Waste Management Rules 2016, yes. This comes under Solid Waste Management. Then Plastic Waste Management Rules 2016, yes. Again, because as I said, the ministry has recently clarified. Biomedical Waste Management Rules, no. So in hazardous and also in biomedical waste, the responsibility lies upon the user. that you have to go for waste segregation, you have to go for proper tagging, and then you have to dispose the waste, and there has to be segregation of at source, etc. Okay? So in this case, the correct answer shall be C, that is 2 and 3 only. Okay? Now, the next question. With reference to the Nairobi Convention on Healthy Rivers, Coasts and Oceans in Western Indian Ocean, which is recently in the news, consider the following statements. It is a part of UNEP's Regional Seas Program. This is true. Second, India is a party to it. This is incorrect. Now, what is this convention about? So, across the region of Western Indian Ocean, again, there has been significant amount of water stress. And more importantly, freshwater sources are threatened. And freshwater sources, oftentimes, they dry up and they need to be conserved. Last year, we had seen about the Okavango Delta and the Okavango Basin in Africa, which already had faced significant amount of threats. If the freshwater ecosystem gets damaged, if let's say they become disease infested, then that can have a cascading impact unparalleled, and many species will immediately start dying. So that is why United Nations Environment Program has launched a regional seas program, so that it ensures that marginal seas across the border of the land areas, etc., they are also taken care of. Okay? So India is not a party to it. We'll look at the various important parties of it as well. So which of these statements are correct? It is one only which is correct. Now, if you look at the figure, these are the countries which have been a party to Nairobi Convention. So here you will observe countries such as Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, Madagascar, Comoros, Mauritius, Seychelles, even France, because it is France which has the control or the sovereignty over La Reunion Islands, and also South Africa. These are the major parties of Nairobi Convention. So look at this image, look at this particular map. It will help you develop the map pointing as well. And these are the important, because all these are present in the region of Western Indian Ocean. So obviously these are the natural members of the convention. India is not one of them. Now, with reference to Wildlife Protection Act 1972, which of the following statements is or are correct? Now, Wildlife Protection Act 1972 has been very instrumental in shaping a kind of a protection program in our country. So that is why you will always find questions to be probable from areas such as Wildlife Protection Act, Biodiversity Act, Environment Act, etc. to be asked in the exam. The Act provides for protection of wild and domesticated animals, birds and plants. This is correct. Then, Schedule 1 and Part 2 of Schedule 2 of the Act provide absolute protection and cannot be hunted. So while the Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, they provide for protection and they have provisions that the animals listed under Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, they cannot be hunted at all. Still, there are provisions that if suppose one particular animal has started becoming a threat to the local community or has become particularly dangerous, or any animal, let's say, is suffering from a disease which can spread very easily, then thereby hunting of that particular animal can be undertaken, provided you have the prerequisite different types of permissions granted to you. So that is why here absolute is the word which is in contention, so this statement will be incorrect. The third statement, the plants in Schedule 6 are absolutely prohibited from cultivation and planting. So here again, First of all, you have to understand that there are 6 different schedules. Out of that, it is in the 6th schedule where you have plants listed. Plants such as the different species of vanda, which sometimes can be poisonous, etc., which are threatened, endangered, all of them. So there is a restriction on their cultivation and planting of those species. But then there are certain exceptions for scientific studies, etc., where you can actually do that. So again, here the word absolutely has to be looked into, making the third statement incorrect as well. So we have to find out which of the statements are correct. So in this case, the answer will be A, that is one only, which shall be correct. Now, questions are oftentimes asked regarding the schedules of this and Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So ideally, you should be aware that what these schedules are about. Very briefly so. So Schedule 1, it basically covers endangered species that need continuous and rigorous protection, for example, tigers, for example, Asiatic lions, etc. Even Schedule 2, the animals under this list are also accorded high amount of protection, and there is a general prohibition of the trade. Schedule 3 and 4, there those species which are not endangered, they are included. Then you have Schedule 5. Schedule 5 is the one where animals are considered to be a vermin. Now, what are vermins? And this is the reason why we have been discussing about this particular question. So recently, Goa had submitted an application to declare wild boar as a vermin. Now there are certain species, certain animals, or even it can be certain different types of birds as well, which can be particularly menacing in a particular local diversity or ecological region. Now in that particular area, their number might be so huge that they are not endangered, but rather they keep on having an impact on the local community, they keep on disturbing the agricultural practices, etc. So that is where a permission is sought for an animal to be declared a vermin so that it can be hunted and it can actually be killed whenever it starts serving as a nuisance. So here Schedule 5 deals with vermins. It is Schedule 6 where regulation in cultivation of a plant species. So plants are placed under Schedule 6 of this particular act. This particular detail is something you should be aware of. This has been asked earlier as well, and there is quite a significant amount of probability that this can be repeated in the examination. Now, next, consider the following statements regarding nationally determined contributions or NDCs. Now, when you talk about nationally determined contributions, basically after the Paris Agreement, it was decided that rather than imposing a kind of a target on each of the different countries, let each of the individual countries come up with their own individual set of targets and let them try to achieve that. The only provision being that every 5 years they have to revise the target, and the revision has to be in an upward trajectory. It doesn't have to be that, okay, this year we will take our green cover to 20% and 5 years from now I bring upon a new target that I will bring my green cover to 15%. No. Every year, every 5 years when the target is presented, the target has to be incremental in its basic quality and quantity. And it is a kind of a voluntary discretion upon the various different countries. Now, this has been one of the key achievements of Paris Agreement. Now, out of all the countries which have been a party to the Paris Agreement, it is only India as a major country which has or which is very, very close to already achieving its NDCs. And in fact, recently, the Indian government issued a statement that we can do much more than what we have been doing. So thereby, let us take a look at the statements. Here you have to remember that India is the only country which has been on the track to achieve the targets. So that can form one of the statements of the question. Now, it embodies efforts by the countries who are party to the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. This is correct. The second statement. Successive NDCs are to be submitted in every yearly meeting of UNFCCC in progression as compared to the previous NDCs. So here the key word is yearly. Even though the meeting happens yearly, the targets have to be submitted every 5 years, because in order to achieve those targets, in order to realistically start working on those targets, you cannot have the target renewed every year. That puts the whole point to be absurd. So that is why this is incorrect. Next, once accepted by the UNFCCC, it is legally binding on the countries to achieve the targets submitted by them. Again, it is not legally binding for them, but overall the countries have to try, or rather they have to be open to inspections in this case. So here the third statement is again incorrect. So which of the above are correct? So you will have A, that is one only, which is going to be the correct option. Okay? Now, moving on to the next question. The term leadership in energy and environmental design, LEAD, recently in news is related to training program conducted by the Energy and Resource Institute to promote sustainable design in large projects? No. International certification system for the green buildings developed by the US Green Building Council? Yes. That is what leadership in energy and environmental design is all about. It is about green buildings, because believe it or not, green buildings are one of the easiest implementable tools which are available to us to mitigate the impact of climate change. As the world is warming, we need cooling solutions. So in order to have the houses which are naturally cooled, in order to have the office spaces which are naturally cooled, we need to have greener buildings, and that is the whole concept of greener buildings. Even in India, you have a rating for the green building system which is referred to as the GRIHA system. So that is where you have to be aware that it is actually the green building design. Now, the next one. With reference to the Forest Act 2006, consider the following statements. Only the lands which have been taken up for cultivation after the law has been enacted are eligible for title rights. Think about it. Forest Rights Act 2006. So once this act has come into force, the first statement tells us that those lands which have been cultivated after that, they shall also be provided forest rights or title for those lands. This is incorrect. Basically, the title shall be provided to only those families or only those communities which have been carrying out cultivation or farming activities in that particular land for a considerable duration. Second, the land recognized under this act cannot be sold or transferred. This is again true. This has been, or this provision has been brought into effect in order to prevent the rampant commercial exploitation of forest lands and forest areas. Third, the Gram Sabha is the final authority to approve the land titles. So while Gram Sabha has got immense power, but it is not the final authority. Even after that, you have the clearance required at taluka level and district level. So it is the district monitoring committee which is the final authority. Gram Sabha is not the final authority. So which of the following statements given above is or are correct? The answer in this case will be B, that is 2 only. Okay? Now, moving on to the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity, TEEB or TEEB as it is referred to. Now, this is an initiative basically whereby the primary goal or the motive is to explain to the population, but as well as more importantly to the policy makers, the economical value and the overall incremental value that the biodiversity of an area can possess. Because it was realized that most often and oftentimes the governments of the day, they don't take a decision because they don't see economic benefit out of it. And most of the biodiversity or ecological conservation programs, they preach the idea that look at the tree, look at the forest. The forest is very important for XYZ, sequestration, diversity, etc. So you should conserve it. But the policy makers, oftentimes they look at the real value rather than the intrinsic value. So that is where the conservation effort is lacking in many cases. So under this program of TEEB, under this initiative, there has been an effort to exhibit a kind of an economical and environmental benefit accruing out of the biodiversity prevalent in an area. So it is focused on making nature's values visible. Its principal objective is to mainstream the values of biodiversity and ecosystem services into decision making at all levels. So it is primarily targeted at policy makers. Now here, the natural capital accounting and valuation of ecosystem services, or what is referred to as NCAVES project, seeks to advance the theory and practice of environmental and ecosystem conservation, typically in areas such as Brazil, China, India, Mexico, and South Africa. Right? So in all these countries, there has been a continued, renewed effort in order to bring about the accounting and valuation of ecosystem services, to bring about a kind of an authenticity that if you conserve this biodiversity, this is the economic benefit that you will have. Take for example, suppose when we talk about freshwater ecosystems such as a small stream or a river, that small stream or a river, if regular desiltation activity is not carried out, it can very soon lead to floods. And when floods happen, there's a loss worth billions of dollars. Take another example. Suppose there is an unsustainable practice of agriculture going on in an area. Now, when agriculture in such a way is carried out, then what happens? Slowly, the soil starts degrading. If you keep on applying excessive amount of fertilizers, pesticides, etc., the soil starts degrading. Once the soil starts degrading, it very quickly leads to or spirals into desertification. So in order to reclaim that soil again, you will have to invest billions of dollars. So rather than that, let's go for sustainable agriculture. So you are putting an economical value to it. Okay? So this project is funded by the European Union and is implemented by the Statistics Division of United Nations, UNEP, and also it is worked out at the Secretariat of CBD. Okay? So as you can see, it is a multimodal program. Now, with reference to TEEB, which of the following statements is or are correct? First, its principal objective is to make people realize that every species has an intrinsic value. This is incorrect, because its principal objective is to make people realize that basically there is an economic value associated with it. Second, TEEB Agri-Food, which is a sub-program, is supported by the UNEP. This is actually correct. So the correct answer in this case will be B, that is 2 only. Okay? Now, Next, recently, NCAVES India Forum 2021 was in the news. It is organized by which of the following organizations? So, which of the organizations or ministries have been responsible for NCAVES? So, a slight hint regarding this, if you can take, is that it is the United Nations, the Statistical Division of United Nations, which is looking into it across the globe. So, on the country perspective, you will find that it is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, which is actually responsible for this. So, the answer will be D. Okay? Now, after that, we come to the concept of green highway. So, oftentimes, you would have come across the issue that the government and the NHAI, they have been stressing upon green highways. Now, what is this concept of green highways? It is basically about planting trees on the sides of the roads. Now, while immediately it might seem like a beautification exercise, as an aesthetification exercise, but then there is a scientific logic to it. So, what is the logic behind having green highways? One of the prime logic that you can have is that when you plant trees, let's say you plant trees on the sides of the roads, these trees shall have deep roots, right? These shall have deep roots, and these roots shall bind the soil in its place. So, all the trees on the sides of the roads, their roots shall have a significant amount of vertical as well as horizontal variation. So, thereby they would be able to bind the roots in the place, bind the soil in its place. Now, in most of the highways, you will observe that the degradation of the roads or the highways that is initiated once the soil underneath the road in itself that starts moving, maybe under very heavy or huge amount of rainfall, under immense weight imposed by the overlying vehicles, etc. That is what leads to very quick degradation of the infrastructure. So, in order to preserve that, you need such trees. So, there is a kind of a scientific logic to it, but there is an environmental aspect to it as well. Most of the roads that you will observe, they are black in color or darker in appearance because of asphalt and tar which have been used for the road construction. So, most of them are significantly darker in color. Now, because of that, what happens is that they consume or they absorb significant amount of solar rays. When the solar rays fall upon these roads, most of it is absorbed, very little amount is reflected because the albedo is very low. Now, as the road infrastructure across the globe is increasing quite considerably so, thereby you will find that basically the warming is also being felt in various different areas. So, that is why you need a kind of a cooling activity at the same time. When you plant trees across the sides and along the sides of the roads, not only you provide natural cooling by the impact of the shade, thereby ensuring that lesser amount of sun rays are absorbed, but simultaneously all these trees, they undergo evapotranspiration. And what is this evapotranspiration? When the trees, they start losing water from the various pores which are present. When the trees, they start losing water from the various pores present in the leaves, that is what is transpiration. And whenever this event happens or takes place, there is a natural cooling effect. So, again, green highways along with green buildings can be one of the measures which can help us fight global warming and more particularly so urban heat island effects. Okay? Now, Let us take a look at the question. So, regarding the Green Highway project, consider the following statements. 1. 1% of the total project cost of all highway projects will be kept aside for plantation along highways and its maintenance. So, earlier what was actually followed was, it was a kind of a voluntary activity and a voluntary exercise, where the contractors were being said that, okay, you should do this, this is a good practice. But as long as any object or any activity is voluntary, not many people adhere to that. So, that is why this was not observed particularly so. So, that is why 1% of the project cost has to be set aside mandatorily. And it is estimated that close to around 1,000 crores can be accrued by this particular share of money. And this will be then used for planting the trees. Okay? So, this is correct. Here, maintenance is another important activity which has been added. Second, it is developed by the National Highway Authority of India. Very correct. Third, for release of funds, the survival rate of trees should be 90% in the previous year. Now, this is again another clause which has been added, because it was felt that, okay, when you tell the contractors that you have to plant the trees on the sides of the roads, very often these contractors would plant certain saplings, and those saplings would not be given water or any other nutrient, they would not be taken care of, and very soon the saplings would die. Now, the contractor would receive the next tranche of funds, and similarly, by the end of the project, the whole area would be barren again, even though the government had spent money on that. So, that is why maintenance and survival rate of the trees has been catered to, because now the contractor shall be forced upon to look into the maintenance of these trees and to ensure that they are healthy enough. Now, this Green Highway project, it has brought about certain kinds of trepidations and reservations at the same time, because under this project, some area on the sides of the road, so suppose this is the road, some area on the side of the road has to be preserved for planting of the trees as well. Now, this has raised protests again from the sides of the farmers, where the farmers are protesting that in many of the cases, in many of such highway projects, their farmlands are threatened. So, that is where this has met with some amount of reservation and some amount of opposition at the same time, which is something you have to keep in mind. So, for release of funds, the survival rate should be around 90%. That is true. So, in this, the correct answer will be D. Now, here another thing that you have to keep in mind is that many of the environmentalists and biologists, they raised the question that what if we plant a tree, but that tree is not suitable for a given region. Let's say that Delhi-Mumbai expressway is being built. What if I plant a tree in Rajasthan and the same tree I have planted in Delhi, but the tree in Delhi grows, but the tree in Rajasthan doesn't grow? So, should I be penalized for that? So, the government was stringent upon this, that is where you have to ensure that the species which are responsible or the species which can thrive in a particular region, only those have to be encouraged. Thereby, we will ensure that the indigenous varieties of these plants, these species, they are promoted and their numbers are not threatened. Okay? So, that is the answer, that is D, 1, 2 and 3. Now, with reference to National Biodiversity Authority, which of the following statements is or are correct? The first statement, it is a statutory body. That is correct. National Biodiversity Authority has been established under the provisions of Biodiversity Act. So, the first statement is correct. Second, it is chaired by the Prime Minister. This is incorrect. It is actually chaired by one of the individuals under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change itself. So, this is incorrect. The third statement is, to prevent misuse of biological resources, it is compulsory for all researchers to obtain permission from the NBA. Now, here this is incorrect. Why? Because if you are, suppose, an Indian by birth, or if you are an Indian citizen, and if you are carrying out research within India, you don't need to take permissions for that. Even if, let's suppose, you as an individual are collaborating from certain institutes or certain research organizations of various different other countries, there also you don't always have to take permissions unless and until you are actually conducting a research, let's say in a core zone of a protected area, etc. So, that is where this is incorrect. You don't always have to take permissions for that. So, that makes option A, that is one only, as the correct answer. Okay? Now, after that, with reference to the state of the world's forest report 2020, which of the following statements is or are correct? Now, state of the world's forest report was generated, and that has made certain headlines, even though the overall forested area seems to be in a desirable range, but then still there are many areas such as Indonesia and Malaysia which are carrying out deforestation activities, particularly so of tropical rainforests, at an alarming rate. And why do they do so? In order to grow palm oil. And India is one of the biggest importers, along with China, of palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia. That is why, partly so, India has been partly responsible, along with China, for such a demand in palm oil, due to which now we have launched our own national mission for oil palms. Anyways, looking at the statement, it is jointly released by the United Nations Environment Programme and Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. This is correct. As per the report, around 31% of the global land is covered by forest. That is again correct. Third, and this is the most important statement here, urbanization and industrial expansion are the main drivers of deforestation and forest fragmentation. Now, while on the face of it, it might seem correct, but you have to understand it is not so. While urbanization and industrial expansion have led to deforestation at an increased scale, at an increased level, but then one activity which is primarily responsible has been agricultural expansion. Reclaiming more areas under agricultural activities has been primarily responsible for initiating a kind of deforestation program. I just gave you the example of Indonesia and Malaysia. Similar activities are also being observed in the region of Congo and also in Amazon rainforest in Brazil. So, agricultural expansion is becoming one of the most important factors for deforestation. Even in our country, northeastern part of the country is the one which is experiencing deforestation at an alarming rate. Even though the India State of Forest report, which came out, last report came out in 2019, the next report is slated to come out later this year. That report told us that as compared to the land area, still around 75 to 85% of the land area of northeastern states are still under forest cover. But deforestation is alarming. Why? Agriculture is one of the main prime drivers for that. And this is true across the country, even in the region around southern China. The Yunnan province is where this is being experienced. So the third statement shall be incorrect. Which of them are correct? So in this case, the answer shall be A, that is 1 and 2. Next, consider the following pairs with reference to international decades related to environment designated by the United Nations. So United Nations has been designating a decade, let's say, for ecosystem restoration, etc. So that is what you have to match in this. So 2001 to 2010, here you have United Nations decade on biodiversity. UN decade for biodiversity was observed from 2011 to 2020. So the first is incorrect. Second, 2010 to 2020, UN decade for deserts and the fight against desertification. This is correct. This can be asked because at the culmination of this, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification was conducted in India. Now it was conducted in the month of September, due to which you had questions from this particular area coming in mains exam, but this year it can come in the prelims as well. Then 2021 to 2030, UN decade for ecosystem restoration. This is again correct, and we had seen it yesterday when we were looking at wetlands, because these are the areas which cater, or under this program, wetland conservation is also being eyed upon. So 2 and 3 in this case shall be the correct answer. Next, consider the following statements with reference to minor forest produce. First, it was defined under the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act 2006. This is correct. So here there were many items which were defined so that these items could be collected by the people living in the forest, the tribes, and they could be sold so that they also have a kind of an economic activity going on. Bamboo is not included in the definition of minor forest produce. This is incorrect. Bamboo, along with certain other types of silk, etc., they are included in minor forest produce. In fact, tussar silk is one of those which is actually produced majorly in the tribal areas of the country, because that is a wild variety of silk. So bamboo and these certain kinds of grasses, etc., they are present. Now, the government of India announces minimum support price for various minor forest produce on the recommendations of Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices. Now, this is incorrect. Now, even though the government of India declares a minimum support price, it is actually done by the pricing committee. It is done by the pricing committee of Ministry of Tribal Affairs. It is the Ministry of Tribal Affairs which is responsible for that. Okay? So here the third statement is also incorrect. So you have option A, that is one only, which is correct. Now, after that, the next question. Consider the following statements with reference to traffic. Traffic is an international organization which deals with trade-related analysis of flora and fauna in commerce. So it is a joint program of the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature. This is correct. Second, it aims to ensure that trade in wild plants and animals is completely prohibited across the borders. Now, while traffic is always responsible for monitoring the trade, it is not completely prohibited. So this is incorrect. Okay? So here again you have A, that is one only, which is going to be the correct answer. Then after that, the Dasgupta review recently seen in the news is related to the affairs of. So Professor Dasgupta has been one of the very esteemed professors in Cambridge University. So he submitted a review and an economic aspect to biodiversity laws to Her Majesty's government, that is Britain. So that is where it has been making news, because it deals with the economic aspect of biodiversity laws. So that is why Dasgupta review here deals with biodiversity laws, which is the correct answer. Okay? Next, after that, Sanitation and Hygiene Fund. So basically, the United Nations has launched the SHF, or the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund, because it has been observed, and particularly so during the COVID-19 pandemic, the whole sanitation scenario across the world, it unraveled very quickly. It was found out that poor sanitation practices are being followed across the globe. And here are some data pointers. Close to around 46% of the global population, it still lacks access to the safely managed sanitation practices. 1 in 3 healthcare facilities do not have adequate facilities to clean hands. So the sanitation scenario across the world has been worsening day by day. And this fund, it aims to raise over $2 billion over the next 5 years for the underdeveloped countries, where it can be beneficial. The main goal or the objective of this fund is expanding household sanitation, ensuring menstrual health and hygiene. Now, many of the times, because of poor information and poor knowledge regarding that, the girl enrollment ratio in schools is very, very poor, especially in underdeveloped and developing countries. Providing sanitation and hygiene in schools and healthcare facilities, and also supporting innovative sanitation solutions. So thereby, these were the main objectives. You have to be aware as a candidate that what this SHF is about. So the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund was recently launched by United Kingdom, World Bank, World Health Organization, or United Nations. So it is the United Nations which has launched that. This particular topic is important this year because of what happened throughout the past 2 years during COVID-19 pandemic, where the actual underbelly of the population was unraveled. Okay? Now, consider the following statements regarding the recently launched real-time electricity market. So, first, it is an organized market platform enabling buyers and sellers to meet their energy requirements. This is correct. Second, this platform operates only in Indian Energy Exchange and Power Exchange India Limited. So, Power Exchange India Limited is run by the government, and here basically spot trading goes on depending upon the demand and supply of any particular region, of any particular area. So, this is also correct. Then it would help India to achieve its renewable energy targets under the Paris Climate Deal. Now, what happens is, generally when you have renewable energy, there are not many buyers for it. Why? Because there is still a lot of grid parity which is to be attained, and the production of renewable energy is oftentimes not continuous because of changing weather patterns, changing seasons, etc. But if there is a real-time market, people shall be encouraged to buy that. People shall be encouraged to buy the renewable energy as well. So thereby, once more renewable energy is consumed, all the goals, the nationally determined contributions, NDCs, they shall be much closer to realization. So yes, it would help us achieve the targets under Paris Climate Deal. So in this case, D, that is 1, 2 and 3 are actually correct. Okay? Now, then coming on to the Green AG project. Now, Green Ag project was actually, and again it is funded by GEF, the GEF that we talked about, Along with that, the Department of Agriculture, Cooperation and Farmers Welfare is also associated, and FAO along with the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change have been responsible about it. Now what this is about, it is about bringing about a sustainable agricultural practices in those areas which have a significant amount of biodiversity. Now we have already seen that one of the major causes of loss of forest cover is agricultural expansion. And that is because people are not always aware of how to carry out agricultural activities in a sustainable manner without disturbing the biodiversity of the place. So that is why Green Ag project had been launched, and it is being implemented in high conservation value landscapes, the critical landscapes so as to say. So in Madhya Pradesh, across the Chambal landscape. Now remember, yesterday we had talked about carousel as an animal and how across Chambal, carousel was actually prevalent in large numbers, present in large numbers, but their population has been continuously declining because reclamation of land for agriculture. Then Mizoram, the Dampa landscape, or rather the Dampa Tiger Reserve. Now as per the latest tiger census, Dampa had indicated 0 population of tigers. So that is where you need to ensure that even if agriculture spreads, the biodiversity is not threatened, so that if tigers come back, they should not find that their habitat has been erased. Third, Odisha, Simlipal landscape. Now Simlipal has tiger population, elephant population and many different varieties of flora and fauna, again very critical. Rajasthan, desert national park landscape. There you have the population of great Indian bustard. And in Uttarakhand, Corbett Rajaji landscape, which is present in the Tarai belt of Uttarakhand, and where again you have significant population of tiger. So these are the areas where Green Ag project is being propagated. Now the question, with reference to Green Ag project, consider the following statements. It is funded by the Global Environment Facility. This is true. It is being implemented only in the Himalayan states. This is incorrect. We have seen the regions where they are being implemented. It is being implemented with the assistance from the FAO. This is again correct. So in this case, the answer shall be C, that is 1 and 3 only. Now moving on to the last question. With reference to Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, which of the following statements is or are correct? So it is a central sponsored scheme under the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. So here it is not a central sponsored scheme, it is rather a central sector scheme. When you are going across the various government schemes, please ensure that you look into this as well. Now this Agriculture Infrastructure Fund is to be provided to various different farmer producer organizations, various different individual farmers, etc. And it is a kind of an interest subvention where you provide easy credit at a easy rate at a discounted rate. That is what AIF is about. So here the maximum limit for interest subvention and credit guarantee is 2 crores. That is again true. The limit has been set to be 2 crores. And for different organizations and individuals, 2 crores is a sufficient amount. The beneficiaries under the fund are both individuals and associations. So as we have talked about, that not only individuals, but also organizations, farmer producer organizations, etc., they are also partly responsible, or they are also being catered by this. So this is again correct. The first one is incorrect. So the correct answer in this case will be B, that is 2 and 3 only. Okay? So today again we have mostly covered close to around 40 to 43 different topics and concepts, which brings about the overall environment and the lectures coverage to close to around 100 different concepts, 95 to 100 different concepts and topics via the medium of questions. For this year's examination, please ensure that you go through these and you have some clue about it. You might find questions with statements which absolutely you are not at all aware about. You are completely unaware about certain developments. But do not panic. If you are sure about these particular concepts, just maintain your cool, apply the logic as we have discussed in many of the different questions, apply the elimination method, and you shall be able to score succinctly well. Interconnect the topics of geography and environment, and the way you apply logic to the questions, you will find there to be a significant amount of incremental gain to be achieved there. Having said that, that concludes the lecture series for Environment and Ecology. Thank you guys for being patient enough throughout this. Hope this turns out to be fruitful for you guys. If you like the content, like the video and share it with your fellow aspirants. That will be all from my side. Thank you and all the best for the coming exams. Take care of yourself. Good night.